want to thank you all for taking the time. Personal issue to us as veterans, Veterans Equal Access Act, and I'll just start with a very brief story. When I woke up not too far down the road, Walter Reed Army Medical Center, I was in a situation where I was very seriously injured. Prior to that, I probably didn't have a more serious injury than maybe having my tonsils taken out when I was 3 or 4 years old, maybe a broken finger here or there. And I woke up in a situation where I was probably on 20 different narcotics of various kinds. I had a Dilaudid drip, I had oral morphines and oxys and an epidural. I had anti-inflammatories, heavy sleep sedatives, antidepressants, stuff that I'd never been on or even thought about or could even say the names of before in my life. And I'm just one example of individuals that, because of service, not with any regret, but because of service, have had to deal with pain of various kinds. Sometimes the pain is over friends lost and things witnessed, and sometimes the pain is because of physical harm that's our bodies have undertaken. And if we can make a difference by allowing members of the military, veterans of the military, who have any kind of pain to help deal with that in a way other than the narcotics that they were pouring into us, then we are doing something damn good, because I have seen those narcotics that my brothers and sisters have been on do harm to them that is far worse than what our enemies did to us overseas. The way that it affected their families, beyond the ways that deployments affected their families, the way that it affected their bodies and the mindset, beyond the way that what they participated in combat affected their bodies and their mindset. And so with my colleague here, Representative Blumenauer, we've been working on making sure that our veterans have access to speak with their medical professionals inside of the VA, their trusted medical personnel, about the best course of treatment for them. And in order for them to have that opportunity to have the best course of treatment for them, they have to have equal access. And that's what this bill is all about today. And so I thank you for having the opportunity to work with you on this.
Thank you.
And the microphones are yours, my friend.
Well, actually, I should probably just stop and say what he said. There's no more eloquent person on Capitol Hill to recognize literally the life-saving capacity that we have to be able to help our veterans have full access to medical marijuana. You know, there's a little controversy on some of the issues that I've been working on this for a long time, but one area where there's virtually no controversy is the powerful effect that having access to medical marijuana for our veterans can have. They are some of our most eloquent spokespeople and exhibit A of why it is so important. We lose almost 24 veterans a day taking their own lives. We've seen a situation where, sadly, the VA, which is not on board giving access to medical marijuana, was handing out opioids like Tic Tacs. Yeah. I think there's some changes that are taking place. I've had conversations with the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, but this is a long overdue step. And I couldn't feel better about the partnership with you, Brian, the example you've undertaken, and your willingness to provide leadership. I've been working on this for a long time across the country. I have been touched by the stories I've heard from veterans and their families, but none more so than your very powerful testimony a moment ago. I'm proud of our partnership, and I think this will be the time that we finally get this across the finish line that will benefit millions of our veterans. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. And, so we say, we'll go 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds, and then we'll take their answer. But we'll cut you off in 30 seconds. All right. Ready to go.
Representative Blumenauer, Representative Mast, veterans and supporters, thank you for being here, supporting the reintroduction of the Veterans Equal Access Act. My name is Victor Bohm. I'm an Air Force veteran, and I work for Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. On behalf of IAVA and the more than 425,000 members, we call on Congress to end VA's prohibition on its doctors and healthcare providers from giving advice and recommendations on the use of medicinal cannabis in states with legal medical marijuana programs by passing the Veterans Equal Access Act. The VA's prohibition forces veterans who are interested in medical marijuana as a critical and much needed therapy to deal with chronic issues ranging from PTSD, depression, anxiety, to seek care outside of the VA. This disrupts the continuity of their care and prevents them from engaging in comprehensive discussions with their primary care VA doctor on their medical care options. According to IAVA's latest member survey, over 30% of IAVA members reported using cannabis for medicinal purposes, yet only 16% reported having discussed the use with their private primary care health provider. This legislation has already passed out of the House several times, the House Veterans Affairs Committee several times, right before the pandemic, and the bill passed as an amendment to the House NDAA last year. IAVA and our allies within the VSO community have spent years educating Congress, national leaders, and the public on the need for medicinal cannabis as an alternative therapy for veterans. The veterans are counting on Congress to pass this comprehensive legislation without delay. Representative Blumenauer, Representative Mast, veterans, supporters, IAVA is proud to stand with you today to support the Veterans Equal Access Act. Congressman, we thank your committed staff for everything you've done to get us to this point. It's time that veterans have the same access as their civilian counterparts. Thank you.
I know you're an Air Force guy, but you did that like the Ranger did.
Good afternoon. My name is Justin Brown. I'm a Navy veteran. I'm AMVET's legislative representative. And I'm tired of seeing 6,000 of my brothers and sisters die by suicide every year. For 5 years, AMVET's #1 priority has been creating and funding effective programs and services that significantly reduce suicide at the VA and within the Department of Defense. We've lost more American service members and veterans to suicide in the last 2 decades than in any American war other than World War II and the Civil War. Since 9/11, more than 120,000 veterans have lost their lives. And the problem is only getting worse at both the VA and the Department of Defense. We're spending billions of dollars, billions, on poorly designed, old and unproven methodologies intended to reduce suicide and negative symptomology amongst veteran and military communities. Despite Congress having invested more than $130 billion since 2006, you would be hard-pressed to find any meaningful data suggesting these investments have resulted in a long-term positive impact on the veteran population. Congress must stop being scared of stepping up and trying new things. And that is why bills like the Veteran Equal Access Act are so important. And AMVETS is proud to support this common sense legislation that ends VA prohibition on doctors and healthcare providers giving opinions or recommendations on state legal medical cannabis programs. For years, the mental health industry has frightened us with ideas that things would only be worse without them. We believe the situation would likely be far better had we invested in finding more effective programs focused on increasing veterans and service members' quality of life and ability to handle stress and adversity. This bill does that. We are grateful for the work of Representatives Mast and Blumenauer for their efforts to introduce the Veterans Equal Access Act. We must try new approaches because the status quo is simply unacceptable.
Congress has been guilty before of doing more of the same.
That's right. Congress is guilty of doing more of the same.
I could never imagine that taking place.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brittany Diamond with the VFW. Given the choice, many veterans often prefer to receive their care at VA, yet a parity gap is rapidly widening between veterans receiving care at VA and their civilian counterparts across the United States, its territories, and right here in the District of Columbia. 37 states, 3 territories, and Washington, D.C. have legalized medical cannabis. That's nearly 3/4 of the country, where veterans are unsure or afraid to discuss state medical cannabis options with their doctors. Some veterans across the country are hesitant to even use VA healthcare because they are concerned about having to discuss the cannabis products they are legally putting in their bodies with VA doctors. That must stop. The Veterans Equal Access Act will put an end to veterans being unable to have meaningful discussions about all of their health options with their doctors at VA, and hopefully lead to more veterans receiving the high-quality health care that VA provides. We look forward to working with Congressman Mast and Blumenauer and the veteran organizations standing here beside us today to get this bill through the House and Senate and signed by the President. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Let us down.
Do my best. My name is Tom Seaman. I'm a Marine Corps veteran and the Legislative Director for With Honor Action. With Honor Action is proud to support this bill for one reason: equality. Let me be clear. This bill does not allow the VA to prescribe medical marijuana. It simply addresses an inequality for veterans. Currently, in states that have legalized medical marijuana, VA doctors are prohibited from even discussing medical marijuana as a potential treatment. While non-veterans can be prescribed these treatments, veterans cannot even discuss them with their primary care providers at the VA. This means that veterans are forced to pay out of pocket for non-VA medical care, and that VA doctors may be unaware that their patients are taking marijuana. It's bad policy and unfairly deprives veterans of a medical option in states where it is already legal. With Honor Action, thanks to all those members of Congress who have worked on this bill, and we look forward to continuing to support this zero-cost, bipartisan legislation that fixes this problem by simply providing veterans with the same opportunity to discuss medical marijuana with their primary doctors as everyone else in states where it is already legal. Thank you.
What can we answer for you all?
How are you working with the Senate this time around? Is there a Senate same as bill?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, how are you working with the Senate to get this through the finish line this session?
Well, we've had very productive conversations with the Senate leadership, but this is fundamentally something that we need to do our job in the House. Being able to once again display the overwhelming support and build understanding of what this means. But my conversations with Senate and Senate staff indicates that there's movement in the Senate. I'm very optimistic that they're not going to be an obstacle when it comes to veteran equal access. They're moving on other things that are more controversial. But this is this isn't just low-hanging fruit. This is picking it up off the ground, and I'm convinced the Senate will be there.
And, I mean, when you look at the common sense of all of this, to not be able to discuss something with your designated medical professional, with your nurse or your primary care physician, or to talk about the benefits or the hazards of something, it's absurd that in any place you can't do that, but especially where we are, as veterans, are saying this is where your care is going to be taken care of. It goes beyond the pale. This doesn't make sense for any veteran, and it's not just something where you could fix something and make lives better, but you're actually creating a problem by not allowing it to happen, and that's even worse. So, Senate's not always common sense.
Congressman, what has changed this year that you think will move this forward? Because we have talked about this a lot in the past. The VA leadership are saying they've got to wait until Congress acts before they can really do any more on this issue. So what's different now?
I'll give you one piece. I'll start with that one. There's been big arguments over the last year about states' rights. And not just this, but cannabis policy in general. If people are in this building are being intellectually honest with themselves, which doesn't always happen, I acknowledge that, then they need to look at it like anything else that they went out there and said, well, that's an issue of states' rights. I'm glad to see that go back to the states. That's an issue of states' rights. Well, this is an issue of states' rights in general when we're talking about cannabis policy, but especially if we're talking about states where there's already cannabis programs, to have the VA not be able to talk about it in that place, it doesn't pass any kind of test, and in that, I think it makes it more likely that we can get real movement on it.
But part of what has changed is that this notion of giving veterans equal access to other Americans is widely accepted. We're seeing motion in a variety of states moving on medical cannabis, and if in those states we're talking about veterans, it's like the 4th of July. I've been having conversations in Texas, which is not probably going to lead on drug reform, but this is something that is widely supported in Texas, state after state after state. When voters have a chance to deal with medical cannabis, it's overwhelmingly supported. And I think the number of our colleagues who have been touched by the stories they've received from veterans and their families, I think it's reached a point where I don't think there's going to be any stopping this. I don't think it's going to be a problem in the Senate. We just have to do our job, allow the process to work, and continue to put the spotlight on the brave men and women who deserve equal access.
I don't mean to make light. We have awesome Capitol Police. They were walking the dog around us. I wonder if they were profiling us. What we were talking about.
Representative, several of your Republican colleagues have come out against marijuana in the past. What are you doing to convince them now that the Republicans control the House?
So, same thing that I just mentioned. Look, you were having this argument 6 months ago or a year ago about states' rights. This is the pinnacle of states' rights. It's really the tip of the spear of states' rights, where you can see every state dealing and grappling with this issue. What do they want to do with it? What do they want to ignore about federal law and move their own policy for it? So respect that and be intellectually honest about it. And that's the conversation that I have with any colleagues that have questions about the issue.
But I think, in fairness, the number of Republicans, regardless of how they feel about legalization or other reforms, when the question is put to them, should veterans have equal access to other people in their state to be able to discuss medical cannabis with their primary care doctor, I find there's not that much debate. People should not have to move away from the people who care for them in the VA to be able to get what could be a life-altering therapy. And I think that recognition is strong, and by no small measure, the eloquence that Brian has had. I think the momentum is much, much greater than it's ever been. It's true.
Anything else we can give y'all?
We have a question from folks who are live streaming in. Historically, the VA has been hostile to this legislation. Have you gotten any signals from the department's perspective that has changed under President Biden's administration, and that they might be more agreeable this session? For Congressman Blumenauer, can you expand on your conversation that you mentioned with the Secretary earlier?
Well, one of the first conversations I had this Congress was with Secretary McDonough of the VA, who acknowledged the stories that he's hearing from veterans, and I think has a greater open-mindedness. President Biden, who has not been involved with legalization of cannabis, pardoned 4,500 people for low-level offenses, and has initiated a conversation within the administration about the appropriate categorization of cannabis. I think there's movement, but I think the people in the VA itself are the most powerful advocates if they are honest. And I've been on Veterans Administration properties. We discussed this at one point. As I was leaving, the last time I was there, one of the employees of the Veterans Administration took my arm and said, "This saved my life." And I just think that's building, and I think that's why we're going to be successful.
The before and afters of veterans that have been helped speak for themselves. And they will tell you their own stories, not because they're pleasant to tell, but this was me before, this was me after, this was me before, this was me after, and you can just hear it again and again and again, and you can't ignore that.
We have one more from the live stream. Congressman Mast, with Republicans in the majority, I'd like to get your opinion on the prospects of this bill advancing and your general impression of the prospects for any type of cannabis reform being enacted with the House GOP in control. Have you had any conversations with leadership on that end?
We have had conversations with leadership. There are other members that on the GOP side that are a part of the Cannabis Caucus that have been pushing veterans equal access. And strict descheduling and safe banking, and this touches every committee in Congress, it touches every member. Everybody is well aware of the issue and looking for places where for themselves they can say, yeah, I can get on board with that. I can see that being a problem that we have to fix. And so yes, there's absolutely progress going on, and I do have high hopes of policy and legislation moving under this House of Representatives.
That's it for the live stream.
Can I get a photo for my